I have no idea. Let's take this. No. Third.
All right, we'll start in about 1 minute. Everyone just get situated and we'll start about 1 minute.
Good idea.
She'll feel better tomorrow. They had a little problem. It took 3 days to happen. Oh, okay. I hope to hear better. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll begin on page 6 of our Siddurim. Page 6 with Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hashayret, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamakim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boechem Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Varchuni l'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Seitchem l'Shalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon. Mi Melech Malachei Hamachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'd like to invite Heidi up for the blessings right now. Thank you.
Come, let us welcome Shabbat.
May its radiance illuminate our hearts.
Light is the symbol of the divine.
The eternal is my light and my salvation.
Light is the symbol of the divine within us.
The human spirit is the light of the eternal.
Light is the symbol of the divine law.
For the mitzvah is a lamp and the Torah a light.
Light is the symbol of Israel's mission.
I, the eternal, have made you a covenant people, a light to the nations.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'had l'pnei shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Amen.
Blessed are you, O eternal our God, who makes our lives holy through divine mitzvot and has commanded us to kindle the Shabbat lamp. May the eternal bless us with Shabbat joy.
Amen.
May the eternal bless us with Shabbat peace.
Amen.
May the eternal bless us with Shabbat holiness.
Amen. Thank you, Heidi. We're going to now turn to page 9 of our Sidurims for L'chai Dodi. L'chai Dodi li kala yadadai 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 panei Shabbat nekabela. L'chai Dodi li kala yadadai 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 panei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor b'zachor b'dibor echad Hishmiyanu el hanuchad Adonai echad u'shamo echad Lishem ol tiferet v'litihila L'chai dodi likra kala yadadai 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 panei Shabbat nekabela. L'chai dodi likra kala yadadai 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 panei Shabbat nekabela. Likrat Shabbat lechuvin elcha ki mekor habracha mirosh mikedem nesuka sof maseh b'makra tehila. L'chai dodi likrat kala yananai 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 panei Shabbat nekabela. L'chai dodi likrat kala yananai 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 panei Shabbat nekabela. Hi ori kiva orech kumi uri, 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 shir daveri, kavod Adonai, alai negila, lechaidoi dilikra kala, yenenai, 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 b'nei Shabbat, nekabela, lechaidoi dilikra kala, yenenai, 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 b'nei Shabbat, nekabela. Now we rise and face the exit. Boi v'shalom atzeret bala, gam v'simcha u'v'tzola, toch emunei am sigula, boi kala, lechaidoi dilikra kala, yenenai, 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 b'nei Shabbat, nekabela, lechaidoi dilikra kala, yenenai, 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 b'nei Shabbat, nekabela. We now remain standing for page 11 for the Chatzi Kaddish. Yitgadal ve'yitkadash Shemei Rabba, be'alma dira hirotev yamlich malchutei, b'cha hayechon u'vyomechon u'chayedecho beit Yisrael, ba'agala ubizman kariv v'yameru amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevorach le'olam olam me'almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitbar v'yitraman v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shemei dekudasha brechu Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran v'alma v'yameru amen. Remain standing on page 12 for the Baruchu. Baruchu et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai Hambarach Leolam Vaed. Turn to page 13. When we read together in the English of the italicized text. Eternal God, your majesty is proclaimed by the marbles of earth and sky. Sun, moon, and stars testify to your power and wisdom. Day follows day to endless succession, and the years vanish, but your sovereignty endures. Though all things pass, let not your glory depart from us. Help us to become co-workers with you and endow our fleeting days with abiding worth. Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv arabim. Blessed are you, O Eternal, who brings on the evening. Continue with the Shema on page 14. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Leolam Vaed. You may be seated for the V'ahavta on page 16. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha ub'chol nafshecha ub'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'eleh Asher Anochi Mitzavecha Hayom Alevavecha Vishnatan Levanecha Vidibarta Bam B'shitecha B'veitecha Uvletecha Vaderech Ushachpecha Uvkumecha Ukshartan Leot Al Yadecha V'hayu Letotafot Bein Einecha Uktatam al mizuzot beitecha ubisharecha leman tizkeru vasitem ekol mizotai v'hitem kidoshim legalechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeti etchem mi'eretz Mitzrayim Liot lachem Elohim, ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem, emet. We continue on page 17 with the English responsive reading. Eternal truth is that you alone are God, and there is none else. Let them beat their swords into plowshares. Let nation not lift up sword against nation, let them study no more war. Let the stranger in your midst be to you as the native, for you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. Continue on page 18 with Micha Mocha. Micha Mocha Bailim Adonai, Micha Mocha Nedar Bai Kodesh, Nora Tehilot Osei Fele, Malchut Charu Banecha Bokeyam Lifnei Moshe, Zeli Anu V'Amru, Adonai Yimloch Leolam Va'ed, V'ne'emar ki fada Adonai et Yaakov iglo miyad hazak mimenu Baruch atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. We continue on page 19 with the English responsive reading. Cause us, O eternal our God, to lie down in peace and awaken us each morning to renewed life and strength. Spread over us holy shelter of your peace.
Help us to order our lives by your counsel, and lead us to paths of righteousness.
Continue on page 19. Curb also within us the inclination to do evil and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Guard our going out and our coming into life and in peace from this time forth and forever.
Blessed are you, O Eternal, whose total shelter is peace forever us, all times we live Israel and over Jerusalem.
Continue on page 20 with Vishamru. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat la'asod et ha-Shabbat le'doretan berit olam. Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asod et ha-Shabbat le'doretan berit olam. B'nei Yisrael oti le'olam, oti le'olam, oti le'olam. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asod et ha-Shabbat le'doretan berit olam. Ki sheit yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim v'et ha'aretz v'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asod et ha-Shabbat le'doretan berit olam. Uvayom hashvi Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash, Shabbat vayinafash. V'shamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat La'asod et ha-Shabbat le'doretan berit olam. We now rise on page 21 for the Amidah standing prayer. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagita hilatecha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Elohei avotenu ve'imotenu Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Hasadim Tovim, Vekonei HaKol, Vizocher Hasdei Avot Ve'imahot, Umevi Geulah Lifnei V'nehem, Leman Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch Atah Adonai, Magen Abraham, V'Ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Li'olam Adonai, Mechayei HaKol, Atah Rav Lehoshia, Morid Hatzal, Mekakel Chayim Bechesed, Mechayei HaKol Berachamim Rabim, Somech Noflim V'Rofeh Holim, Umatir Asorim, Umekayem Emunato Lishene Afar, Mikamocha Ba'al Gevurot, Umidon Melach, Melech Nemi, Umechaye, Umatzmiach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah lehahayoy takol, Baruch atah Adonai Mechayei HaKol. Atah kadosh Rishim HaKadosh Ukoshim B'chol Yom Yeholelucha Sela, Baruch atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. You are holy, your name is holy. The holy ones praise you every day. Blessed are you, eternal, the holy God. We now daven silently until the end of the Amidah. We join together afterwards for Oseh Shalom on page 29. We'll join together on page 29 for Oseh Shalom. Oseh Shalom Bimramav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Imru Amen. Ya'aseh Shalom, Ya'aseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael. B'yameru, Amen. Good Shabbos, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. This week is one of my favorite Torah portions. I say that though with some hesitation. This week's Torah portion is one of the most challenging texts that we encounter in our Torah. It is a calling attention to our people's first true embrace with zealotry, even dare I say it, religious extremism. As our people were ready to enter into the Holy Land, they made a blunderous decision. While entering near the land of Israel, the Israelites took Midianite wives and forsake their birthright and faith in God. Inspired what can only be described as true zealotry, Pinchas, as is described in this week's Torah portion, took matters into his own hands. He murdered a high-ranking Israelite and his Midianite wife to make a point, and his point underscored endogamy and propelled the identity of the Israelites first and foremost in the land where they resided. Later on in our Torah portion, the daughters of Zelophehad will go before Moses and ask more conventionally for him to plead on their behalf to God and for the tribe of Manasseh to be awarded a parcel of land adjacent to the land of Israel, chiefly where the Moabites and Midianites once stood. Both Pinchas and the daughters of Zelophehad had similar aims and goals in this week's Torah portion. However, their mechanisms and delivery were dramatically different from one another. In many ways, Pinchas's methods and the methods employed by the daughters of Zelophehad, they play though one hand in hand with one another. Though without the function of one or the other, it's hard to imagine that the outcome would have been the same from this week's Torah portion of underscoring endogamy and control of the land and its people. Though the theme of this week's Torah portion, zealotry, is as unavoidable as the name of Pinchas in our Parshat HaShavua. Although this week's Torah portion depicts our people's first embrace with zealotry, it seems to be setting the stage for a romanticism that has long outlived and endured antiquity and survives into our contemporary modern existence. So what do we as Jews think about zealotry? Are our people opposed or in favor of taking actions into our own hands? This week is all about that. Let us for a moment remove ourselves, though, from the shadow of antiquity as described in this week's Torah portion, which dates back some 3,500 years ago. Let me speak from my personal experience. 20 years ago, I was preparing for my bar mitzvah, and my bar mitzvah was set to be in the land of Israel. I prepared for this day much like I see our bar mitzvah students at a time. However, my bar mitzvah was to be set in Israel, atop Masada of all places. Masada to this day is associated with the word zealot in a perfect way. What we know about Masada is documented by Josephus Flavius in his historiography, Antiquities of the Jews. Josephus noted that following the year 70, after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, the zealots of the Jewish rebellion against Rome held one final stronghold, and it was at the plateau of Masada. The Roman army received orders from Rome to crush this final stronghold of the Jewish people and of their resistance. And thus, the siege of Masada ensued and lasted months. During the siege, the Romans built an elaborate path for their army all the way up to the top of the peak of the plateau. And as the Roman army prepared to breach the walls of Masada, the zealots decided in an act of defiance to take matters into their own hands. They decided to take their lives rather than to live under Roman bondage and slavery. During the 1960s and during the 1970s, as Israel began to reclaim lost heritage sites, archaeologists discovered Masada, and the site became a focal point for Zionism. Imagine again Israel fighting on all sides during the 1960s and during the 1970s against all odds, and delivering victory over victory against her enemies. Masada was and is the perfect backdrop to the story of Israel, the story of indignant and often inglorious defiance. So too, Masada was a pristine site to have a bar mitzvah. I'd learned about my identity for many years, my Jewish identity, and my family in Israel, and I wanted to feel connected with them in a visceral way, and Masada brought me to them. Sadly though, my bar mitzvah coincided with the second intifada, and days before my bar mitzvah, the plans had to be cut short. Only a few years later was I able to return to Israel, stand at Masada, and have the bar mitzvah I trained for, surrounded by friends and family. Yet as I grew in age, I began to question the narrative I'd been taught from a young age about this site, and about the zealots, and about extremism. Now, as an adult, the narrative of Masada seems incomplete in some ways. The harsh reality is, the zealot narrative is very problematic. We have often taken the high road as zealots on plenty occasions, but to what end, and did the ends justify the means or even reach their goals? Was the mass death at Masada reasonable? Imagine for a moment the actions of other zealots throughout our history and the repercussions of their actions. For instance, in 1938, Herschel Greenspan, he assassinated the German diplomat Ernest von Rapp, but it resulted in the Nazi pogrom of Kristallnacht. Were Greenspan's actions justifiable? Most relevant, though, may be the creation of the State of Israel. Certainly zealots were an important part of Zionism. Our earliest Zionist leaders and ideologues may be described best with the word zealot. Many of the earliest Zionists were indignant, independent, and even violent. Many people routinely slate the more extreme early Zionists, the Stern Gang, Herut, and even Zev Jabotinsky as not merely freedom fighters, but more akin to dangerous fanatics. Yet the State of Israel would not be what it is if not for the bold actions taken by a few of these zealots. The very act of illegally immigrating, for instance, to the land, defying the Nazis, defying the British, and defying all odds was a courageous act, yet also criminal. However, the reality of Israel's circumstances pairs perfectly with our Parshat HaShavua today. Recall again in our Torah reading how Pinchas was praised by God for his act of zealotry. Yet his narrative is only underpinned by a historical reality provided towards the end of our reading this week. Notice at the end of our Torah reading how the text draws attention to the daughters of Zelophehad, who reached similar conclusions as Pinchas did, but used very different mechanisms of order. Rather than taking matters into their own hands, the daughters of Zelophehad follow a system, a methodical order, a legal and bureaucratic method. They were also troubled by the distractions of exogamy, landlessness, and they turned to their leader rather than taking matters into their own hands. They turned to Moses, who then turned to God for guidance. God assured the people of Israel that they would be awarded the lands adjacent to the land of Israel, and God praised both the daughters of Zelophehad and Pinchas at the end of this week's Torah portion. However, they used very different methods. The historical and biblical reality contains, though, both realities of narrative. That the zealot, that and also of the bureaucratic conventionalist working hand in hand with one another. Their methods are completely divergent in path, but they work to similar goals, and their goals come together in a beautiful way. That experience can be translated to our modern experience in Israel. Imagine again a people without a land, without UN recognition, underpinned through a bureaucratic process of legitimization and legalism. As we often call it, Israel is the most legal state upon its inception. But on the other hand, imagine a land without a people. If the waves of Aliyah, often illegal, had not taken place, and people had not taken matters into their own hands. Imagine if they had not forcefully seized the land from British colonists and other occupying forces. If not for these actions, it is equally hard to imagine the birth of a nation state. However, it is hard for me to imagine the ancient Israel we're reading about in this week as being much different from our contemporary experiences. Yes, today our skin does crawl when we hear about the actions of Pinchas, the actions of early Zionists, about the bombing of the King David Hotel, or of the mass casualties of Arab villages like Deir Yassin. Yet as much as we want to reject and disapprove of these acts, we must also recognize them as a part of our Genesis and creation story. Maybe not a beautiful part of it, but it is a part of it. A part that we must not have to embrace, but we have to accept as reality. We walk a delicate balance in Judaism, with zealotry described in the biblical text of this week's Torah portion. And our challenge is, as Jews, to not lose our Jewish identity in the enactment and enchantment of being a zealot of faith. Yet at the same time, we are expected to be Jews with zeal. Ironically, the most Jewish enactment of self-determination, the mass suicide that is described at Masada, is directly prohibited in Judaism. And so too were the violent actions taken by many early Zionists. Those are prohibitive too in Judaism. Although we may disagree with ourselves or the world around us, we need to stay true at heart as Jews and not lose ourselves, lose what it means to be a Jew in the chaos of zeal and zealotry. May this be our message from Pinchas in this week's Torah portion, Ken Yehi Ratzon. May it be God's will. So in just a moment, we'll be joining for the Misha Berach. If you know the Misha Berach, it's the Debbie Friedman version. I'll be opening the Ark for the Misha Berach prayer. Please rise as the Ark is being opened. Misha Berach Avotenu Mekor Habrecha Le'imotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach Imotenu Mekor Habrecha Le'avotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. You may be seated. So I'd like to, can we have our announcements? I don't know who we're calling up for announcements today. All right, Mary. Thank you, Liz. What was that? We got new steps, everyone. We got new steps, and if you can enjoy the smell, it's really a wonderful. Many of you may know I'm a woodworker, and I love the smell of wood. So I come out here periodically throughout the day, and I'm just like, who needs to meditate? I just come here and enjoy the smell. So if you ever need to do that peacefully, come on by here. Okay.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbos.
Saturday, July 23rd, Shabbat worship, virtual and in person. Torah study at 9:30 a.m., Shabbat worship at 10:15 a.m., Kiddush lunch to follow. Summer picnic, Sunday, August 14th, 11:30 a.m. to 4 p.m., Grove 3A in Thompson Park. Register on weekly email by August 7th. Etz Chaim will provide hot dogs and hamburgers. Please bring appetizers, side dish, or dessert, and your own drinks, no dairy. More information on weekly email. Wednesday, August 24th at 6 o'clock, there will be an interfaith tea at the Reformed Church in Spotswood. Topic, how various houses of worship have embraced people with LGBTG+ background. Rabbi Leslie will speak. Potluck dinner is tentatively planned. Jewish Family Service Auction is online July 6th through July 31st. More information on weekly email. Ritual Committee August 1st, Social Action August 3rd, Board Meeting August 4th, Blood Drive August 28th. Hebrew School Meet and Greet registration September 7th, Open House Brunch September 11th. More September and October dates you can find on the weekly email. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So we will now turn to page 30. Yashikoyach, thank you. We'll turn to page 30 for the Aleinu We Rise. Aleinu l'shabeach la'edon hakol la'teit gidula liyotzeh breshit shelo asanu kiyel aratzot velo samanu kimishpachot ha'adama shelo sam chalkeinu kachem v'gor aleinu kichol hamona v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'modim Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shehu Natei Shamayim V'Yoseh Haaretz U'Moshev Yekaro B'Shamayim Nima'al U'Shchinatu Zo B'Gov Pei Meroimim Hu Eloheinu Ein Od Emet Malkeinu Efazulato Kakatuv B'Torato V'yadata Hayom V'hoshevota El Avecha Ki Adonai Hu Elohim B'Shamayim Mima'al V'yal ha'aretz Mitzachad Ein od. Continue on page 31 together at the top of the page. We therefore hope in you, O eternal our God, soon to behold the splendor of your might. Then will false gods vanish from the earth, and the idols will be utterly cut off, to heal the world through the sovereignty of the Almighty. Then will all acclaim you as their God, and forsaking evil, turn to you alone. Let all who dwell on earth acknowledge that unto you every knee must bend, and every tongue swear loyalty. Before you, O eternal our God, let them humble themselves to your glorious name. Let them give honor. Let all accept the yoke of your dominion, that you may rule over them soon and forever. For the dominion is yours, and you will rule in glory, as it is written, the eternal will reign forever and ever. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol ha'aretz Vayom hahu yihyeh Adonai echad U'shemo echad. You may be seated. In just a moment, I'll be reciting the names from our Yortzeit list, and in addition to that, the names of members of our community who have recently passed. If there are any additional name requests from anyone in our congregation, please share with us the loved ones in the individual that you're observing either Yortzeit for or in the period of Shloshim for. Recently passed are the following: Florence Gottmacher, Stephen Finkel, Ruth Lowenthal, Joyce Coven, Robert Pfeiffer, Benjamin Cohen, Judith Ellen Schuler, Philip Osteen, Stanley Taub, Steve Goldblum, Jacob George Tobel, Peter Lozama, Stan Perlman, David Schneider, Raphael Marcus, Florence Schneider, Sylvia Tannenbaum. Our Yortzeits for today continue with the following names: Jenny Porras, James Barclay Katz, Morris Lerner, Jane Kaplan, Edna Gerber, Abraham Schwarber, Marvin Berg, Ruth Schulman, Francis Rychek, Melvin Schwartzberg, Sadie Stumacher, Rose Feifelbaum, Zelda Axelrod, Helene Feldman, Willie Ivrakis. Are there any additional name requests from anyone in our community? Yes.
Yes, Amanda Newman,
Amanda Newman,
Ben Rodriguez,
Ben Rodriguez,
Fred Kellogg,
Fred Kellogg,
Judy Merman,
Judy Merman,
and Warren Simon.
Warren Simon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other name requests? No? Okay. The words to the Kaddish can be found on page 33. If it is your custom, please rise. Again, the mourner's Kaddish is on page 33. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shamei rabah v'yalma dira hirutei v'yamich malchutei v'chayechon u'vyomechon u'v'chayedecho beit Yisrael v'aigala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen Yehei shmei rabah mevorach li'olam ulamei almaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramah v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shamei d'kudashah berechu la'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata damiran v'alma v'imru amen Yehei shlama rabba min shamaya v'chaim aleinu v'el kol Yisrael v'imru amen Oseh shalom niramav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu v'el kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort all who are bereaved. And let us say, Amen. You may be seated. So our final song for this evening is going to be Adon Olam on page 34. Page 34, Adon Olam. Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem kol yitzir nivra li'et nasa v'chevzo kol azai melech shemo nikra v'yachad reikid lo takol levado yimloich noira v'hu haya v'hu hodeh V'hu yiyeh b'tzif ara V'hu echad v'yein sheni L'hamshilo l'hachbira B'li reshit b'li tachlit V'lo ha'oz v'hamizra V'hu eli v'chayagoali V'tzor hebli v'yet sara V'hu nisi umanos li Menat kosi beyom ekra V'ya'ado afkid ruchi V'yet ishan v'ya'ira V'im ruchi geviati Adonai li Velo ira. Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos. We volunteer for anyone who would like to do Kiddush. Going once, going twice. Shannon, anyone? No? I'll do it if no one else volunteers. It's me.